everybody. Welcome to our spring event. And I'd like to thank Hedgerow Theater for loaning us this venue. This is the uniquely appropriate venue for this talk. And as most of you know, this was the historical, social, spiritual center of the arts and crafts community, only that fireplace was at floor level at the time.
I remember that.
Now, our speaker tonight wrote such a great curriculum vitae that I'm just going to read it. Ryan Berley is a Median native, his parents having been married at the old mill in Rhodes Valley. I believe that was before the catering. When the family wasn't traveling the country visiting antique markets and museums, they were living above their antique shop on Baltimore Pike, called the Saturday Evening Experience. Ryan graduated from Washington and Jefferson College with degrees in history and entrepreneurship. This is what I find cool. He used his education. Following college, he worked as an auction specialist at Samuel T. Freeman and Company, heading the 20th Century Design Department. He has traveled to arts and crafts sites in England, Europe, and the United States, and attended a variety of arts and crafts conferences. In 2004, Ryan and his brother Eric, also in full costume, opened the Franklin Fountain, a turn-of-the-century soda fountain ice cream parlor in Old City, Philadelphia, that has received international acclaim. In 2011, the Berley brothers purchased and preserved nearby Shane Confectionery, the oldest candy store in America, and continue to handcraft sweets on-site in the old world tradition. They've been featured in Smithsonian Magazine, the New York Times, Food and Wine, and received preservation awards for their work. Ryan has curated and lectured on craftsmanship, history, baseball, and confectionery at local and international institutions. Ryan lives in a 1911 Tudor craftsman in Lansdowne, and he is faithfully restoring the objects from the arts and crafts movement, particularly those from the Arden and Rose Valley communities, about which he is most passionate. Ryan, you also know that both those places had rival baseball teams.
Yes.
Yes.
We haven't reenacted that yet, though.
In full costume.
You should start that back up with Arden.
I just went to visit the Franklin Fountain. Everybody's in full costume. It was a raw, drizzly day, not ice cream weather. There was a constant line at the door, so this says something. You're filling a niche that I didn't know about. Okay, anyway, Ryan Berley.
How's everyone doing tonight?
Wonderful.
Thank you all for coming. Thank you, Morris, for that wonderful introduction.
Cell phones.
Cell phones off. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
No? Okay, I'll try to speak a little louder. All right. Can everyone hear me now? One interesting thing about the Arden baseball team is that they actually wore the English Gothic A, and they wore blue and white, which is the same as the Philadelphia Athletic Baseball Club, the club that we recreate from the 1860s. So we just need to come up with the Rose Valley Club, and perhaps use the Tudor Rose as its logo there. Just want to mention a little housekeeping note that in a few weeks, on Sunday the 26th, I'll be giving a tour through the collection at the Delaware Art Museum of their pre-Raphaelite paintings. And there's a special exhibit on Aubrey Beardsley's illustrations for Salome. The museum actually has the original illustrations on view, and they're exquisite and quite racy. And you'll get to see the version that they published, but the version that they didn't publish. And this is going back about 1895, so it's really incredible to see Beardsley's work that time. So there's a sign-up sheet outside during the afterward party. You're welcome to sign up, talk to Morris or one of the other members about going to that. So this evening we're going to talk about a couple of things, and we're going to try to draw some points together here about the arts and crafts movement, which is why Rose Valley exists the way it does today. But we're going to go back to English history and give a bit of the backdrop for why Rose Valley kind of has this Anglican feeling, and also to understand why the Tudor rose. What's the symbol that we see around the valley and on the Historical Society's letterhead. And I would also encourage you to join the Historical Society and come out to these events because they're really wonderful. And Morris and Sue and Paula and everyone that's members, they're really doing a great job. So we really thank you for your contribution tonight. The monies go to the Historical Society and to the Hedgerow, who I'd also like to thank as host. This lecture tonight is dedicated to Robert Edwards, who was an inspiration for me and for other people in the arts and crafts community. I came to a lecture in this very room in 1998, right after graduating college. With my folks, I didn't know anything about the arts and crafts movement, really. We grew up in media, was interested in history, but we never really knew what Rose Valley was. And Robert Edwards illuminated the history of this place. And not only has the history been sparked in myself and my brother and a lot of other people, but it's a way of life, and it's a way of doing things that is very inspirational. So Robert passed away recently, and I'm hoping to channel his spirit here tonight. So we're going to go way back, 500 years, and talk about the rose a little bit. To say that this photograph here was taken about a month ago. Did anyone follow Richard III? And so I don't maybe need to repeat the whole story, except to say that an amateur historian figured out that Richard III's body was buried under a civic parking lot in Leicester, England. And everyone sort of thought this guy was crazy, but he did his homework. And sure enough, the first day that they dug into the parking lot, they exhumed a skeleton that scholars were able to identify as Richard III. So there was this big to-do. Richard III was killed in battle and basically buried on site on the battlefield. And he was a young monarch. He had usurped the throne, so it was very controversial at the time. Richard was from York. And when I was reading one of these stories, they said, oh, one of his relatives actually carved this coffin, a very distant relative. They said it was carved simply in the manner of the day with a Yorkist rose. I didn't really know what a Yorkist rose was. And so I looked it up, and the Yorkist rose is white. If you were from York, the rose was white. If we think about York, Pennsylvania, in my Googling around, I learned that, oh, York, Pennsylvania uses the white rose as their symbol. After Richard III passed, the throne was reclaimed by Henry VII of Lancaster. So this is the more immediate line that Richard had usurped the throne, and the Lancasters used the red rose. Sure enough, Lancaster, PA today knows itself as the city of red roses. And there's always, I guess, this little healthy competition between York and Lancaster, PA. And so it's sort of interesting to start thinking of these boroughs in the Pennsylvania, southeastern Pennsylvania, as little English towns. Okay, these were English Quakers coming here in the 1680s and 90s, following William Penn. The first group was 8,000 people, followed Penn over, and they were really the first to settle Delaware County, Lancaster County, York County. A lot of the German settlers were up by Germantown and went further north. So the English influence is right here where we're sitting today. You can see on the hat of Henry VII is red rose? Well, interestingly, Henry married a lady from York. She's showing her pride here with her white rose. She thought it would be only fitting to mend the ways the family had spread apart and create this united rose, which is called the Tudor rose. And this now is the symbol of the British royal monarchy. It's the red for the Lancaster and the white for the Yorkists. This five-pointed rose is essentially the symbol that Will Price and the other designers here in Road Valley used in the arts and crafts period. Although they called it a wild rose. So there was sort of an English or an American take on this very kind of regal British symbol. We're going to fast forward a few hundred years and really start our story with John Ruskin, who was the most influential art critic of the 19th century. This is an original photograph of Ruskin. This is a clip from a film that Lizzie and I just saw called Mr. Turner. Did anyone see that? Okay, great. It was a really great film, and the scene with Ruskin was really exciting because he's...
Oh, that was him?
That was him.
In the movie? Oh, God.
He was very... he's a young man here, very precocious, very pretentious. He's really acting like an arrogant snot in the film. And you kind of want to slap him, but I think they did that on purpose to illustrate where British art was at the time, because Turner represented the old guard and Ruskin represented the new guard. So anyway, Ruskin was a very thoughtful individual, and he did have his personality quirks, but he was very influential, and his ideas were published in a number of books that he wrote. He lectured and was a professor at Oxford and Cambridge in the mid-19th century. This was the England that Ruskin was looking at. Okay? Industrialization had really taken hold in Britain in the 18th century, and the city of London, like many American cities later, was blackened with soot and smoke, and sweatshops with children and women working cheek by jowl, often in tenements. This actually looks like a factory, but I found pictures online where there were little tenement workshops. This was the sweatshop of old, and what Dickens was writing about as well. This was a very real thing, and Ruskin was really interested in reforming art and architecture as part of a social mission. He wasn't as much of a social reformer as some who came later. He wanted to influence society through the betterment of art. This is what Ruskin and his contemporaries were reacting against. So imagine for the first time in human history that any physical object that you might have used, a tool or a book, if you even owned a book, or a vessel to drink water, would have been handmade. Literally handmade, and so they were very precious objects. By the 1850s and 60s, the technology existed to carve furniture, to cast columns, to make buildings by machine. Furniture could be stamped out. And so suddenly there was this new generation that was experiencing that material culture. And I think of it the way that we look at cell phones and computers today. You know, we in this room represent the first generations of humanity to experience computers. What a revolutionary new thing for humankind. For thousands of years we've existed without computers. Well, this was the same way with material culture in the 19th century. And to social reformers, then as today, we look at it with a little bit of a slanted eye to say, is this good for our culture? What are these devices doing to us? What are they doing to society? Is it ripping us apart? Is it helping us? Perhaps some of both. I think that's why it's difficult. So this is the kind of Victorian decadence that Ruskin was seeing and really being repulsed by. This is actually a Frank Furness house in Philadelphia about 1870. In 1849, Ruskin wrote The Seven Lamps of Architecture. So we'll go through these very quickly. Sacrifice, dedication of man's craft to God. So Ruskin had a religious overtone, and he really did see his philosophy being channeled through God. That particular vein of arts and crafts really didn't permeate throughout. It was really a secular movement by and large. Truth, handcrafted and honest display of materials and structure. That's a really important point. So just remember that. Being able to see how things were made. An object has an inherent truth about it. Power. Buildings should reach upward towards the sublimity of nature by the action of the human mind in the work and constructing. So there's this upward reference to the heavens, but he uses nature in place of the word God. And this is an idea that the transcendentalists here in America were writing about. Thoreau and Emerson, they began to see nature as their God, in a sense. The theme of nature is very much a defining characteristic of the arts and crafts movement. Beauty, aspiration towards God expressed in ornamentation, drawn from nature. There it is again. Life. Buildings should be made by human hands so that the joy of their craftsmen is associated with the expressive freedom given them. This is the releasing of human expression through objects, and we should celebrate that. Why? Because it's being lost. Because machines, for the first time, are doing the work of men and women. Memory. Buildings should respect the culture from which they have developed. Obedience. No originality for its own sake. Now, Ruskin he suggests English early decorated Gothic is the safest choice of style. So he has a particular slant. But I think the important thing here is no originality for its own sake. And this is where Ruskin and the aesthetic movement diverge. Because the aesthetic movement was art for art's sake, which is in some ways glorifying the individual and trying to bring a dramatic or trying to elevate the originality aspect. And modernism and the arts and crafts movement really diverge in the early 20th century because the moderns wanted progressivism and originality, and a lot of the arts and crafts thinkers were suddenly looked back at being too romantic. They were romancing the past, or the rose in this case. These are A.W.N. Pugin, the Gothic Revival architect. He really took Morris's idea in an architectural way. This is Westminster Palace, that is part of where Parliament meets. So this is a major, this is Britain essentially saying, yes, we believe in this new thing called the modern Gothic. And the term modern Gothic was coined at the time and used. It was a new interpretation. This wasn't arts and crafts yet. The term arts and crafts doesn't really come until the 1880s or 90s with the Arts and Crafts Society. So this is really the first generation. Again, you see the stylized Tudor rose. This is the cathedral at Rheims in France. And Ruskin and many of his contemporaries were looking at the medieval buildings in Europe, particularly the cathedrals, and saying this is the apex of what humanity can achieve and has achieved in the past. And they were looking at the medieval and Middle Ages period to say, this was the time where the world was perfect. They were romancing it. Of course, the Middle Ages were also the time when the Black Plague happened. But that was the late Middle Ages. This is the high Middle Ages. And it's a theme that we see throughout. In 1851, 52, Ruskin wrote some more and expanded on these ideals in the Stones of Venice. Morris told me last week when we were here doing the test on this program that, oh, did you hear about the Ruskin daguerreotypes that were discovered in Italy? Did anyone else hear about this? She's a pretty keen lady. And I looked it up, and there's this incredible story where at a rural Italian auction house in 2006, this group of 325 daguerreotypes of architecture in Venice was being sold at auction with an estimate of 80 pounds. No identification as to who the photographer was. Two bidders independently identified them as the work of John Ruskin, the lost daguerreotypes. They bid them up to 75,000 pounds. One of the parties won and spent the next 9 years researching these and has just published a book about these daguerreotypes. And sure enough, these are the lost daguerreotypes of John Ruskin, where he was going around Venice, photographing architecture, making sketches from the architecture, and then writing the Stones of Venice. So this is actually a priceless archive that they were able to find. And it's kind of neat that it has this contemporary twist today. One of the things that Ruskin wrote here, and this photo illustrates it, we want one man to be always thinking, and another to be always working. And we call one a gentleman and the other an operative. Whereas the workman often ought to be thinking, and the thinker often to be working, and both should be gentlemen, in the best sense. So this is the division of labor that was happening with the Industrial Revolution. Suddenly, some people were workers, and other people were designers. And other people were managers of workers and designers. And yet, Ruskin and other philosophers at the time were saying, we're all humans, and we all have these capacities in more or less ways. And so they felt that being a craftsman and a designer at the same time was an ideal. Ruskin developed some followers, and in 1848, the PRB was founded, and that's the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood. Some of their principles: to have genuine ideas to express, to study nature attentively, so to know how to express these ideas, to sympathize with what is direct and serious and heartfelt in previous art, to the exclusion of what is conventional and self-parodying, and learn by rote. Most indispensable of all, to produce thoroughly good pictures and statues. These were fine artists that were working in sculpture and painting. And they called themselves the Pre-Raphaelites because they felt that art history stopped at the time of Raphael and Michelangelo. They felt that those artists were actually glorifying the classical tradition of ancient Rome and Greece, and that after Raphael, that art became rote, that they were regurgitating themes that had no soul, in a sense, and this is what these artists felt. And they really felt that the time before Raphael was the apex of art, and they painted pictures to express this. I just discovered this last night, this painting. I thought it was a really great one because it shows a very unusual scene of Christ in his father's cabinet shop. And this must be a reference to the craftsman ethos. This is quite early, 1850. Christ in the House of His Parents. This was exhibited at the first Pre-Raphaelite show, and Charles Dickens basically spit on it. He thought it was vulgar. He felt that the family of Christ looked like alcoholics, and that their posture was awkward and medieval, and Dickens wrote about it. And the Pre-Raphaelites sort of were panned as a result of this. But this was the kind of the rebellious young artist movement that these guys wanted. I mean, they weren't doing it to be sensational. They were doing it because they felt they had a different perspective on the religious art and that they could make that new and fresh. I think it's a wonderful painting. At that same show, Sir John Everett Millais, the same painter who did the last one, did this from one of Shakespeare's plays. And this is Ophelia singing while she has just plucked some poppies from the garden, and she's about to sink under and pass on. Millais' attention to detail, and it's hard to tell on the slide, but he was an extremely meticulous painter. He really captured flowers and local fauna very carefully. So this is that naturalistic theme coming through. There was this spiritual nature of the Middle Ages that spoke to the Pre-Raphaelites. And there was a purity embodied in young, beautiful women that comes up again and again in these Pre-Raphaelite paintings. If you come to the Delaware Art Museum tour, we can see wonderful paintings like this and talk more about that in person. By the way, Victorian symbolism of flowers was a big deal, and the poppy symbolizes death. Gather ye rosebuds while ye may is the name of this painting. This was actually done around 1906 by a second generation of Pre-Raphaelite painters. Old time is still flying. And this same flower that smiles today, tomorrow will be done. Did anyone see Dead Poets Society? What's the phrase in the movie? Same idea here. Seize the day. Pick the flowers while ye may. Because tomorrow, those same flowers will be dead. So grasp the opportunity. This painting is at Delaware. It's huge. It was done of a series called the Briar Rose series, which is an interpretation of the Snow White story. And the court has fallen asleep, and the briar roses are overtaking and growing over all of the people. And when an errant knight comes by, he plucks one of the roses and lays it by the princess. The princess is shown in another painting that I don't have here tonight. She awakens and the whole court is saved. By Sir Edward Burne-Jones. He was one of the famous Pre-Raphaelites from the early era. William Morris was a student at Oxford and listened to John Ruskin speak. He was quite moved by him. Morris was a bit more political in his leaning, and he was an anarchist, or he followed some anarchist ideals, and he read Marx, like right when it came out. So think about that. Marx and Engels were writing their manifesto, right around 1850. So when this is all happening, so he's internalizing some of those ideas, as well as founding the first socialist league in England in 1884. Morris came from a privileged background, and so he decided to use his money towards the arts and crafts ideals and the philosophy of John Ruskin. In 1860, his friend Philip Webb designed what's called the Red House in England, and he would invite his friends over, who are artists and craftsmen, to make paintings, to make stained glass, and to decorate this house, and to do it in a kind of an experimental way. Red House is really the first arts and crafts building in the world, in this conscious way of thinking about arts and crafts and reacting to the industrialization. Jane Morris was Morris's wife, and also was the muse of one of his friends, Dante Gabriel Rossetti. Rossetti painted Jane Morris time and again. They definitely had an affair when Morris was, I think he went to Finland for a summer, and they had this wonderful summer together when Rossetti lived at Red House. It was this whole, there are these dramas, not unlike the Middle Ages, happening with these different artists. But anyway, Rossetti's one of the other key figures. Again, you see the red flowing hair, this diaphanous young woman, and roses to symbolize love and passion. By the way, at Arden, we'll mention this, their guild hall was originally called Red House in honor of this home. In 1861, Morris founded, along with some of his friends, a decorative arts company. And their idea was to make furniture and wallpaper and ceramics and textiles with ideals, with high ideals, and to not do it in a sweatshop fashion, but to do it in a place where the workers had lots of light. Look how far apart the workers are standing. Look how much beautiful natural light is coming in. It seems idyllic for the worker. And this was felt by these writers that this is the ideal environment to be expressive. They're block printing textiles here. This is 1883. And the pattern is called Loden. St. George and the Dragon. Probably know this story. This is a classic Middle Ages tale, and a lot of the arts and crafts designers use St. George and the Dragon in their writing or in their designs. Ruskin actually created a guild called the St. George's Guild, which still exists in England today. Stained glass by Rossetti. Again, Pre-Raphaelite maiden. This looks again like Jane Morris. And very dramatic scene. This is their bedstead at Kelmscott Manor. Jane and William Morris and their two daughters moved to this home in the rural Cotswolds. I visited there. They're open one day a month. On Wednesday. And I drove a rental car from London at rush hour to get there before they closed. And I made it at about 15 minutes late.
Oh no.
But I did get to see the beautiful gardens around and look at the pear trees dripping with fruit. Someday we'll go back, but this incredible embroidery was done by Jane and May Morris, one of their daughters. It's full of the original furnishings. There are paintings by Rossetti and others. So if you get the chance and you're there on that one Wednesday a month. Morris is buried in a very simple grave at a medieval monastery about a mile from there. So we got to see his grave. The apex for William Morris is the Kelmscott Press. He wanted to express his ideas in book form, And this was an art form that had not been really revived yet. Book printing, like everything else, furniture, silversmithing, glass, it was all being mass-produced, and so you lost this tactile feel of the book, the hand-printed pages, the handmade pages, the leather bindings, all of these things in the book arts. William Morris created the Kelmscott Press, and his tour de force was the work of Geoffrey Chaucer, which was a book 5 years in the making. It took Edward Burne-Jones to do the illustrations 5 years. William Morris was basically looking over his shoulder, doing the decorative designs throughout. At the end of it, William Morris died. So 1897, that was his last breath of air and a creative air. He finished the book. 400 copies were printed on paper, something like 40 were printed on vellum, and 13 copies had this tooled leather binding. A paper version goes for about $65,000 today. And when I was at Freeman's, we actually got to handle one for an estate. And it was, I mean, it's a big book. It's like, it's this incredible thing. And you could feel the pages. Morris imported the paper from Italy. He wanted to make his own ink. That didn't work out, so he went to Germany and sourced this special ink that would replicate the medieval inks. I mean, he was really into it. One of Morris's proteges was C.R. Ashby. Okay, Ashby was a fair amount younger, but he wanted to do the same thing Morris was doing, but in a small shop format. Ashby created a socialistic experiment called the Guild and School of Handicraft in 1888. And the school was intended to put impoverished folks to work and to teach them a manual trade that they could use in life. And the Guild taught, they had serious craftsmen that were teaching mainly metalwork at the Guild. And I'll just read a brief thing about the mission of the Guild of Handicraft, established in 1888, to seek not only to set a higher standard of craftsmanship, but at the same time, in so doing, to protect the status of the craftsman. To this end, it endeavors to steer a mean between the independence of the artist, which is individualistic and often parasitical, and the trade shop, where the workman is bound to purely commercial and antiquated traditions, and has as a rule neither stake in the business nor any interest beyond his weekly wage. You get a little of the socialistic flavor through Ashby. About 1906, Ashby moved his workshop, shown here, to Chipping Camden in the Cotswolds. Has anyone been to the Cotswolds before? Great.
Into that workshop.
When?
Cool.
2 years ago.
Neat. And doesn't it look very much the same?
Looks the same.
It's remarkable. When I was there 12 years ago, they had these little hammers lined up on the wall for doing this little beautiful silver work that they do. And the craftsman, realized I was interested. He brought up this ledger book, and he said, "Oh, can you sign the ledger book?" It was an old ledger book. So after I signed it, he said, he's like, "I want to show you something." And he flipped back to like 1906, and there Frank Lloyd Wright's name signed the same ledger book. Frank Lloyd Wright, Will Price, and others they went on tours of these arts and crafts places in England. And they were inspired. And likewise, Ashby, I should have mentioned, came to the United States. He came to Rose Valley in 1906. And he actually was lecturing in Reading at a technical school. And he gave a series of 6 lectures up there. And we think that he probably stayed here in Rose Valley. And he and Will Price exchanged letters. And Ashby wrote things in The Artsman, which Will Price published. some of the stuff that the Guild of Handicraft. They did really fine silverwork, jewelry. You can see these cabochon stones and enamel work that became trademark for them. The shop still exists, as this gentleman noted, so really encourage you to go. The town will take your breath away. I mean, it looks like it hasn't changed since about 1600. So now, here we are at Will Price, who is really being handed the torch, in a sense, by Ashby. Price and Ashby are basically contemporaries. Price lived a fairly short life compared to Ashby, but they were sort of one and the same, in a sense. Price grew up in an old Quaker family here in Delaware County. These are English Quakers. Price is an old name. He grew up on the Providence Road, about a mile from where we are today in Wallingford. The Price family moved around a little bit. They did live in Lansdowne for a short time. And Price went to the Westtown School. Yes.
That painting was painted upstairs.
Wow.
Cool.
They have a picture of it.
Where is it now?
Where is it?
Pardon?
Where's the painting now? Do you know?
It's made F&M.
Oh, really?
Until we get a museum here. Then we have to give it back.
We'll have to work on it.
Don't you think?
This looks like it was done, or he looks like a young man. I think one of the things about the black and white photos, sometimes he looks a little older. I was looking for a younger picture of Will. And,
Can I say something else too?
please, Mars.
See that red spot? That's apparently the first rose and V symbol.
Really? Wow. I would love to go look at that. The next lecture, we will have a blow up of that, I promise. That's really neat. Will went to Westtown School. He studied architecture at University of Pennsylvania, right? Didn't he go there?
I thought he was, no.
Just for
I didn't think anybody studied architecture then.
Okay. Well,
He apprenticed with,
with Furness.
thank you.
So he's gathering the tradition from Frank Furness, and that's another lecture, but Furness really was espousing a lot of these same ideals, although Furness, he embraced the machine in the way that Will Price and others did not. But he definitely internalized a lot of the ideals about naturalism and organic architecture from Furness. And Price was practicing in the 1880s and 90s, building what looked like Tudor homes in the Philadelphia region, generally for wealthy clients, industrialists and other. In 1897, Price built his dream home, or what he thought was going to be his dream home, in Overbrook Farms. Price and his brother, Walter, designed the homes at Overbrook Farms. They're incredible houses. Just drive around one day, just right off the City Line Avenue. You know, you'll see the flags for Overbrook Farms. He called it Kelty, named it Kelty after an English manor house. But Price seems sort of restless. Here he is in the prime of his career, and he's living in this incredible English manor house, a short ride from his work. His office, architectural office, was at 16th and Walnut in Center City. He kind of had everything. He had a young family, and he was restless, and had a group of friends that was called Seekers After Knowledge. They actually called themselves SAK. So it's not that different than the PRB of the Pre-Raphaelites. And they hung out, you know, and did plays together and talked about art and politics. So Price went back to his drawing board, literally and figuratively. One of his buddies was Frank Stevens. Stevens studied sculpture under Thomas Eakins at the Pennsylvania Academy of Art. He married one of Eakins' sisters. And then a few years after that, he called Eakins out for using nude models in an inappropriate way, and essentially got him fired from his job at PAFA.
Wow.
That's another story. Frank's relative, I'm not sure what Alice Barber Stevens, Charles Stevens,
I think they're first cousins.
first cousins, is of Rose Valley origin, or they eventually came here to live in Thunderbird Lodge. So there's a lot of these familiar connections between Rose Valley and Arden. Frank Stevens wanted to build a community under the single tax theories of Henry George, who was an English-born but Philadelphia social reformer who came up with these ideas to build communities that would own land, and you would the larger body, like a borough, would pay one tax to the state of Delaware or Pennsylvania or wherever they were being founded. And then the people that would live there or own property, they wouldn't actually own property, they would simply lease, and you would have a 50 or 100-year lease. This was a pretty new idea. Henry George was passionate about this. He actually ran for governor of New York State twice and lost. In about 1898, Frank Stevens and Will Price and a bunch of others got dressed up in army gear and stormed the Delaware State House, hoping to put this bill on the referendum for the entire state of Delaware to go single tax. You know, they settled for Arden. A small community in a small state. But they made a big statement. This is a statue of Will Price at the cello that Frank Stevens did. And this can be seen at the Craft Museum in Arden. How many people have been to Arden? Good. You check it out. Go to the Arden Fair in early September. They have an antique show and a craft show and food and a library sale, and you can tour their museum. It's a neat community. And it's really the sister community to Rose Valley. Founded a year before. It's down Naaman's Road, just south of the Pennsylvania state line. So if you know where the total line is, keep going down Naaman's, and you make a left on 52?
That's right. No. Yeah,
I can't think of the name of the road that you turn left on.
Harvey Road.
Harvey Road. Harvey Road. It's a little enclave like Rose Valley. You'll miss it if you drive by it. Watch what you're doing. You are welcome hither. This is the Arden Woods, which they named the Sherwood Forest. Both Arden and the Sherwood Forest come, of course, from Shakespeare. This is a home that Will Price built for Frank Stevens. It was called the Founder's House, built in 1909. Really, the first 10 years of Arden, this was a summer community. They were camping out in tents and little log cabins. And this is where these artists were living to get away from the city. Remember, Philadelphia looked like that slide of London at this time. Big, huge smokestacks, the workshop of the world. So these folks wanted to get away from this. Frank Stevens really stayed in Arden and ran that community, in a sense, the way that Will Price did for Rose Valley. This is a picture of one of the residents outside of that house. Here's a stained glass made there. And above the doorway, or the lintel rather. It's called "Tomorrow is a New Day." It's one of the mottos. So you can see this romancing the English past and looking forward with these very progressive ideals. And the stained glass is like a galleon ship. And that ship symbolism comes up again and again in a lot of arts and crafts, pottery and decorative arts. It symbolized looking ahead into the uncharted. These are the discoverers. And metaphorically, they were discovering something new. There's a strong element at Arden of pageantry, perhaps even stronger than at Rose Valley. They had big parades through the town with horses dressed up. It looked like the Pennsylvania Renaissance Fair. You look at these photos. Everyone got into costume. This is Frank Stevens in one of the plays there. This is an outdoor theater. They had 3 of them. This is behind the Guild Hall. I mentioned the Guild Hall at Arden. Very similar to this building. It was the heart of the community center. So they had weddings there, they had functions, they had lecture series, very similar to this one tonight. And at the back, they had an outdoor theater. Originally, that building was known as Red House. About 1915, a forge was created at Arden. One of the Stevens brothers here, Don Stevens, started the forge, and the forge existed really into the 50s and 60s, and then it was taken over by a fellow named Peter Renzetti, who's an old friend of mine who ran the Arden Forge out of Westchester for many years. Peter grew up there, he bought all the equipment from there, and he was making beautiful ironwork, really a master craftsman. This is one of the candlesticks that I found at a flea market. The shop mark for Arden says Arden Craft. All right. So if you see something that says Arden Craft in block letters, probably made at Arden. Will Price, while he was very much immersed at Arden, wanted a place closer to the city, and he also wanted to put the craft component in front of some of these political and social ideals that really governed Arden. And so he bought 80-some acres of land in an abandoned valley here in Delaware County. This is what they saw at the time, the mill ruins. This was a mill beginning in the 18th century. In the 1820s, it was a snuff mill, and the name Rose Valley, from what I understand, was named by one of the proprietors of the snuff mill. I don't know exactly why, except there probably were roses here. In 1901, Price builds the first shop, and this was the furniture shop that you'll see in the next slide. No, next slide after that. The other thing that was here in Rose Valley at the time were the guest houses. So this is where the workers for the old abandoned mill had lived. And at the time, they weren't really occupied. So he bought this in a fire sale from the estate of the Osborne family that was one of the last owners of the mill. And I learned from Morris that the Bancroft family of Delaware Art Museum fame and pre-Raphaelites owned the mills at one point too. So Bancroft Road, other references to Bancroft.
No, actually, he owned every mill except that one.
Except that one. Okay.
Yeah.
So this is where the workers lived, and this is where the mill managers lived, to my understanding. Managers had these little twin houses, which are right there across the street, and the workers here. So Price immediately started renovating these buildings and moved his family in. So just imagine there's no running water. They had just moved into this palatial English manor house in Overbrook and had everything set. Price gets this idea that he wants to move to a bombed-out mill in this little valley in Delaware County. Everyone went along. His brother Walter, from what I gather, didn't have the same passion for Rose Valley, but as a good brother, he went along with the idea and really helped make this a community because his architectural skills were instrumental in getting all these buildings renovated, getting the families moved in, and then building these craft shops. So they renovated all this. They renovated this building, which served as what was called Artsman's Hall at the time. And as Mara said, the floor came up about eye level here. And you can see engravings where they've got Rose Valley furniture hovering above us. So the spirit of that guild hall is very much here today. They also rented out different rooms in this mill to other craftsmen. So in 1904, William Jervis, the English potter, took a room here. My understanding is he worked up at the back.
The green room.
Green room? Great. So where the pottery was made was right over here.
Was that Greenway?
Yeah.
Green room. There was also an iron worker here, and we're not sure how long that he stayed. There was a press. They think that the press didn't actually happen in Rose Valley. While there were people binding books here, they believe that the press was actually in Philadelphia, but it was everything that passed the Rose Valley Association, which was the business group that ended up kind of buying up the land around here, had to pass the association's muster. And so in the medieval guild tradition, everything had to be branded with this buckled belt. And so Rose Valley Press was instituted about 1903. They published a series of journals here, which were reprinted in 1978, and they come in 3 volumes, but they're a little tiresome to read. I mean, they're really great reading, but there's a lot of romantic flowering. I'll give you an example. Is Rose Valley worthwhile? This is the first essay in 1903. Is Rose Valley worthwhile? Is anything worthwhile except a blind acceptance of customary conditions and a dumb hope that somehow through evolution or through some agency external to man a better condition will come? The earth is weary of schemes for its ultimate regeneration. What it is suffering for is a measure of actual regeneration here and now. Rose Valley has no quarrel with any scheme for social development, vis-a-vis Arden. Okay? That's okay. Rose Valley fully appreciates the insistence of the economic problem. We know that we're idealistic artists and that money has to come from somewhere. That's what he's saying. This is a test. It holds that whatever comes to man is to come through his own work. What does Rose Valley hope? It hopes that some men, released from the deadening influences of monotonous, unthinking toil, may see such possibilities in life as will make them put their shoulders to the wheel and to strive to lift society out of the rut of accustomed thought or habit. Once the people catch even a glimpse of truth, there will be no further pause until that truth shall be triumphant in accomplished ideals. Basically, they didn't have to write anything after 1903, because that sort of says it all. And the experiment of Rose Valley as a crafts community lasted till about 1907. The Artsman was published quite frequently early on. It was edited by Horace Traubel, who was a Walt Whitman scholar. Yes?
I just wanted to point out that the belt buckle is incorporated into the seal of Strathaven High School.
Wow.
Tradition.
Very cool.
When they formed the high school in 1983, and they researched the history to form the seal, that motif was chosen.
Did it relate to Rose Valley? Do you
Yes.
know? Really?
For that very reason, yes.
That's pretty neat. Thank you. Very cool. Again, you can see this rose, the art that is life. Similar to Gustav Stickley's Craftsman and Albert Hubbard's Little Journeys, these were other arts and crafts thinkers doing the same sort of thing at the time in other parts of America. Here's the furniture shop. Looks similar to the Morris shop. Workmen in ideal conditions, smelling the sawdust, listening to the birds chirp as the steam locomotive is far away up the hill. And their price is not exactly espousing Ruskin's ideal of designer craftsman, because he's designing and the craftsmen are doing. Nothing inherently wrong with that, but that's the way it had to work here. And Price actually had a hard time finding craftsmen that could carve furniture. He went to the top cabinet making shop in Philadelphia and said, "Can I hire a couple of craftsmen for my little experiment in Rose Valley?" And the guy, the old man, looked at him and said, "I can get you a good dowel sticker or a lathe man, but you'll have to go to Europe for a craftsman," which is exactly what he had to do. He had to recruit at least one Norwegian to come over. John Mayne was already here, correct? So,
Isn't that him in front?
is that him?
That's him,
So this is Paula's great-grandfather?
right.
John Mayne, the Belgian wood carver and teacher at Drexel. He was a very accomplished carver, and so the figures and the high-style carving that you see on Rose Valley furniture was probably done by him. By the way, the table that this fellow's carving was recently found in Connecticut, surfaced at an auction, was bought, put up for auction at David Rago's 3 years ago, and sold for $270,000. They were able to, Robert Edwards was able to figure out by looking, these are glass plate negatives, so he was able to actually look at a high resolution scan of this, see the wood grain on this to say, that's the table that the guy is carving in that photo.
What?
It's pretty neat. This is one of the chairs. Here's the Rose and V seal, Gothic emblem. These chairs and tables many times were meant to be taken apart and moved around. Price was selling to a national audience. This stuff was very expensive. That table in the previous slide was sold to another snuff merchant who lived in a huge manor house out on the main line. So this was highfalutin stuff, and one of the reasons the furniture shop failed in 1906 is there weren't enough wealthy people to buy this. And Price didn't want to skimp on quality or integrity of the furniture. Or Gothic carving was expensive to make in 1905. Here's a Morris chair designed by Philip Webb, the same architect who designed Red House for Morris. He designed this for the company in 1866. It's really the first recliner. It had a little mechanism that ratcheted back here. This is an example of what Price is owed to the Morris chair. Also, a recliner, simple lines. Really, he's taking reference here from Gustav Stickley, clearly. I have a Morris chair that I wrote this whole presentation on, made at the Rose Valley shops, but it's Jacobean, turned, and it looks like an English chair from the 17th century. It's a different style. So he kind of played the course. Like if your client had an Elizabethan house, they would make it an incredible Elizabethan sideboard for you. This This table is one of a kind, carved with the rose and V. And here you can see what Ruskin was talking about. Clear pins, dovetail joinery, sturdy, honest, no veneer. You know, this stuff was built to last and will certainly outlast our lifetimes. Very self-conscious in its design and craftsmanship. This is a chair that came up at auction a few years ago, which I believe was exhibited at the St. Louis World's Fair. Price went with the Rose Valley shops to the St. Louis World's Fair and showed furniture and pottery and sold some of it there. On the back of this chair, it says Price and McClanahan and the date of 1903. Holly McClanahan lived in, I don't know the name of the house.
Cherry Acres.
Jerry Acres?
Cheery Acres. Cheery Acres.
Cheery Acres. If folks know that home,
No longer cheery.
Doesn't exist.
not existing.
Yeah, it unfortunately was in such disrepair that the current owner took the house down.
Okay. That's sad. But anyway, Holly McClanahan was Price's architectural associate. And they really did have a partnership. And this chair was probably, I mean, look at this Rose and V. It's huge. This is an advertisement to buy Rose Valley furniture, in my book. I mean, it also, you can barely sit on it.
It doesn't work.
It folds up. It's like a camp chair. Yeah. Which is really cool. I just don't know if it would survive a modern person. Okay, here's Jervis in the green room. This is a piece of Rose Valley pottery. It's fairly simple. Jervis was an internationally recognized author of ceramics. Here's the Rose and V. He only potted between 1904 and 1905 for about a year. So if you see a piece of Rose Valley pottery, it's pretty rare. There was tile work here. I probably don't have to tell you about Henry Mercer in Doylestown. Mercer supplied tile designs for a lot of the houses, and I'm sure you're all familiar with those. This is one of the fireplaces laid in Rose Valley with Mercer tile. This design was done for the McClanahan house. I couldn't find a picture of the actual design if it was actually rendered, but and this is the Guild Hall. Is that here?
Yeah.
Okay. It's pretty similar.
Fireplace is right there.
Okay. So it's up. The bears are way up there. Ethereal. Will Price was the Mikado in this production, and there are some great photos around of him in Japanese dress, kimono, playing. Music and acting and play acting was a personal passion for Price and his friends. And this component of Rose Valley clearly still exists today, as well as in art. I think it's really, this is such a special place, part of the soul of the community. They had a band, they had a baseball team, they even invited frogs to play in the band down in the creek. The Yellow Rose, Morris was telling me at one point, sent me this slide and said, "Oh, did you know the Rose Valley Rose was yellow?" And I did not know that. And I looked into it, and the Yellow Rose was famous for the Yellow Rose of Texas, which was a song about the Mexican War of Independence. And that's another story, but later, at the turn of the century, the Yellow Rose symbolized that you supported suffragettes. During the early 1900s, up until the time when the constitutional amendment was passed, in certain communities, if you wore a yellow rose, it showed that you supported women's suffrage. And if you wore a red rose, it showed that you didn't. So interesting. So I don't know truly if that's why the rose is yellow, but certainly Will Price and others around here supported women's suffrage. I'll wrap up. Sort of we come full circle with this tile. After Robert Edwards passed, his items were sold at auction, and the Rose Valley Furniture bought crazy money and other things. And the only thing that I could afford was a small lot of tiles. And this was at Briggs, and there was this tile in here with the motto, "Gather ye roses while ye may," and the Tudor rose. We don't know the craftsman of this. It has a mark that I can't identify. I don't think it was made by Jervis, but it's certainly appropriate here tonight. Thank you for your time and attention, and if anyone has any questions, I'm happy to answer them here or afterwards. So.
But meanwhile, snack upstairs and downstairs, wine upstairs and downstairs. Go to both venues.